Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to Rare Conversations. Thank you all for joining today's chat, Financing Hope for Coastal Communities. My name is Sanchez Tirona. I'm the Managing Director of Rare's Fish Forever program, which works with fishers, local leaders, funders, governments, and other NGOs to revitalize coastal waters and empower local communities to manage them sustainably. For those of you who have attended Rare Conversations in the past, thank you so much for coming back. If this is your first time joining us, it's a virtual series where we speak with leaders building a more sustainable world. Previous guests have included Wendy Paulson and Paul Butler, Bruce McNamara of Builders Vision, Julie Packard of Monterey Bay Aquarium, and the former president of Costa Rica, Carlos Alvarado. You can visit those and all our past Rare Conversations at rare.org/rare conversations. Today, I'm honored to welcome Markus Knigge, Executive Director of Blue Action Fund. Markus has been the Executive Director and Chair of its Management Board since the Foundation's inception in 2017. And I love that photo of you that we showed, Markus. He has established and grown the fund and maintains overall responsibility of the Foundation and its grants program. Markus, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Rocky.
It's really nice to have you here. So, Markus, tell me, how does a civil engineer like you end up becoming the head of the Blue Action Fund? What was your motivation to get into oceans?
Why not? Why shouldn't engineers work on ocean issues, Rocky? I studied regional planning and international affairs and worked for some time in environmental consultancy, and then I wanted to dig deep into one issue rather than working on too many different type of things. And position came up on fishery subsidies at some stage in Brussels, and I thought that's an important subject. So that is how I entered the marine space. Somehow I got stuck here since 20 years now, and I worked a lot with other NGOs. I actually led a campaign with more than 180 NGOs on the European fisheries policy. So I know a little bit about different sizes and types of NGOs. And I think that was one of the reasons why those responsible for the Blue Action Fund decided to hire me for this job.
Nice. And okay, would you mind telling us about the Blue Action Fund and how it got started? You were there from the very beginning, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was not the one who created it, but once it was decided to create it, then they looked for someone who was actually running the show, and that was me. It was established in very late 2016, so basically more in 2017 by the German government in light of the recently agreed SDGs at that time, when SDG 14 came in as a first time as a sustainable development goal, standalone goal. And it was really meant to channel public funding towards on-the-ground projects. So it's a private foundation in German law, but we only receive public funding. And the nice thing, it's while it was created by the German government, it really developed into a multilateral organization. So now we also have funding from Sweden, from France, from Norway and Ireland, and also some funding from the Green Climate Fund.
And aside from that multilateral aspect of it, what really makes the Blue Action Fund special or different compared to other ocean funders?
I think as always, I mean, as you have very different NGOs, you also have a landscape of different funders. And one characteristic I just highlighted, it's that we are a public funder, and therefore we also have to comply with all public funders' requirement, even if we are legally a private foundation, because the money comes from public sources. All our grantees, including RARE, have to comply with procurement rules, with environmental social risk assessments, with terrorist checks, and all these fascinating paperwork that I guess many of us cherish so much. We also have a very strong focus, so we only work on marine protected areas. We don't work on plastics or acidification or overarching illegal fishing or other things. It's really we focus on marine protected areas and OECMs, other effective area-based management tools. And we have a very strong social focus, i.e. all our projects work on not just on marine conservation, but also on coastal communities. And I think those three are mainly the key, or some of the key features that might make us a little bit different compared to other funders. There are obviously many other things. Just to name one is usually public funders are pretty big administrations. We have an 11-person team. Most grantees have our phone numbers. You can call us up, and that changes, in my view, quite a lot of things.
And the 11 people, how much have you disbursed in funds since 2016? What's the total so far?
I think total is 60 million we are now. Last year we disbursed 18 million, and this year we intend to disburse 20 million.
So you're still able to read all your proposals thoroughly. Okay, can you share one or two of your favorite success stories since you've started?
I think it's a very difficult question, to be honest. I think the one that was most visible and most glamorous, I guess, is that we came in very late, but we also funded organizations that worked on the expansion of Galapagos and Cocos Island in the Eastern Tropical Pacific, and these were massive pieces of ocean that were suddenly under new protection. And I think it's always important to recognize that this is not the result of one funder or one NGO. These are really collected efforts by numerous organizations and also obviously individuals. But it was one of the most outstanding successes, I think, of the ocean community also in the last years. But we had many of them. I mean, as you know, we had a number of successes with you. This is there in Mozambique and elsewhere. I think sometimes also you have just the small things that are sometimes forgotten. So if you suddenly hear that you increased female participation in monitoring, control, enforcement by 2-3 times, you know, that for me these are things that are big successes. And if you see that some fish stocks are going up again in some of the areas, or turtle nests, these kind of things. Obviously, we only read it on paper. We are all based in Berlin, but I'm getting then very excited about my little paperwork here.
Yeah, no, that's true. And at Rare, we're really very privileged to have been a partner of Blue Action Fund since the beginning. You know, the work we've done in Mozambique with you has really helped us move forward. And some of those examples of really seeing women more engaged in the management of their fishing councils, I think has been really a win for us as well. And we're very grateful for the Blue Action Fund for enabling that. And we're very excited about the one we've kicked off in Honduras recently with indigenous communities like the Garifuna. Markus, looking across the whole Blue Action portfolio, you've got really a diverse range of projects. What are some of the key lessons you've learned around protecting coastal ecosystems while ensuring small-scale fishers' livelihoods and potentially that kind of like combination that you're really aiming to achieve?
I think maybe it's already what you say in one sentence, that you know you really have to look at both the communities and the users of those areas, as well as conservation objectives, and somehow to find the right balance and to get the people behind these conservation objectives. And I think this is most of the time fishing. Yeah, it's most of the time also artisanal fishing. Often with the intention to get more destructive fishing types out of a certain area. And still, it's quite complex in the end, huh? I mean, that brings me almost back to my studies. You know, if you have a certain piece of land or a sea, who cares? In the end, it's how do we want to use these areas, and in the ocean, without such clear land titles or ownership titles, often it's even more complex compared to the situation on land. So I think that is definitely one of the key lessons, not just for the Blue Action Fund, but I think also for other funders, that it's absolutely essential to get the communities behind these kind of initiatives. And in order to do so, I think we have taken a number of decisions, or there are some lessons. We, for instance, really think that you need to have boots on the ground. So when we read proposals, we really look very carefully how many staff the NGOs or the different applicants actually have in the area, for instance. So we would not fund projects where you have very few staff, and that staff may be only in the capital but not in the communities itself. So this is something where we really look very hard at and very close at to see if there is sufficient capacity on the ground, so to speak, really in the areas. I think there's also questions on best practice of planning. So being a public funder, we are also under an increasing pressure to apply certain project management standards. So for instance, when I came in, I think no NGO proposed itself to establish grievance mechanisms, for instance, or certain tools that might well make sense if you carry out large projects. I mean, a grant from the Blue Action Fund is usually in the area of 3 to 5 million euros. And then the organizations have to bring their own 25% match funding. So these are pretty big projects. Actually, in most cases, is the biggest grant any organization has received for a specific site or one country. And obviously, with that amount of taxpayers' money, there's also some responsibility coming along with that, and there to find a balance between finding a reassurance to public investors and to the fact that this is taxpayers' money, and at the same time not to kill initiative and to recognize that projects are also changing over 5 years. I think that is something that we are continuing to find a balance. I guess there's never the right answer to it, right?
Yeah, and I think as you spend more years administering more and more grants, you're really seeing the opportunity to, I guess, streamline and standardize some of those guidance a little bit while still making some room for changes and adaptation. Would that be fair to say?
I mean, I think you describe our daily business a little bit. I mean, we are sitting quite often here in Berlin and have discussions. Should we standardize something? Is this actually making the life easier of the grants? Recognizing that we work at the moment, I think, in 22 different countries, and to find the right balance, and just because if you introduce something standardized, surely this is different from all the other funders again. So you have the next discussion again, like okay, is this match, or is this double work? Is this not double work? I think maybe one lesson learned for us is at least that we try as much as we can to have open communication channels with our grantees. And obviously, as a funder, you always have a relationship between a funder who is giving the money and a fund seeker. It's also clear that there's always a certain nuance of fundraising, and obviously grantees also want to look good when they apply for funding. It's clear. But I think if you think it through in terms of our staff, the number of staff that we have, where we are based, it's also relatively clear that we don't have all the expertise and that we are not in a position to tell our grantees how to do something exactly on the ground. That's really definitely not what we are in a position to do. And at the same time, we are dependent on some feedback to also understand our role better. So I think that is really important. For instance, also on our tools. Are we going too far? Are we not going too far with certain ideas to harmonize standards or processes, or not? Or do our reporting templates work, or how does that function? And are we not going down a complete wrong track here? So for us, I think a lesson learned is really that funders can play often a much bigger role than just giving funding, also over the lifetime of a project. in particular if it's political money. So sometimes also my own funders get engaged at a different level. But in order to really capture all the opportunities, I think it's really important to have open communication channels and also not to be shy to acknowledge that not everything is running always as smoothly as maybe one had in mind when you wrote a funding application.
Yeah. No, and I think as a grantee, what we probably see is that you are asking good questions and hard questions, but really kind of like forcing grantees to really think through something. So I think I'll speak for our team who feel that having
Who
survived,
feels the pain, who has to,
yeah,
who has to go
when you
through it.
survive, when you survive a Blue Action Fund process, right? You actually come out better on the other side. Because, so it is a point of pride for our teams, and so that's tough, but in the end, it does make the work stronger and better, I think. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of like the future and really looking forward towards achieving 30 by 30. So worldwide governments and philanthropy and many others really have been struggling to close that funding gap to meet the targets enshrined in Agenda 2030. What do you consider the most important arguments to support the mobilization of more financing needed for SDG 14, especially around safeguarding oceans and coastal communities' livelihoods?
I wished I would have the argument, because then I think I would have already leveraged some additional funding, because I think what you describe is first of all, a true observation. We are lacking funding to get to 30 by 30. And obviously this is a political commitment by the international community. There have also been commitments by governments in terms of funding, which are not yet all fully fulfilled. So obviously there is pressure needed also from civil society to remind decision makers of their commitments, and time is ticking. If you do your calculation, in order to reach 30% protection of the ocean by 2030, we would need to create every single day a marine protected area the size of Switzerland, every single day until the end of 2030, and manage that effectively and equitably. So this is a mind-blowing undertaking. And obviously we need funding at a much different scale and at a much higher level. I guess the key convincing arguments continue to be that biodiversity loss is an essential life support question for all of us. And that's recognized nowadays by NATO, by the World Economic Forum, by OECD. It's all these organizations that are not necessarily famous for being tree huggers or fish huggers. They all recognize loss of biodiversity as one of the top 5 threats to our Earth, to security, to our way of living. And I know that the same is true for climate change, and they also are not necessarily always getting the message across and the funding that is needed. But I think we need to keep hammering that down. And at the same time, I think it's important to also showcase opportunities and to make it easier to invest. And I think that is where both the Blue Action Fund, but also its grantees play also a key role. We are to some extent an offer to other governments, or also to the existing funders, to channel money in an efficient and easy manner from a public investor perspective into good projects on the ground, and showcasing that we can do this in a very lean manner. Obviously, well, I hope at least is showcasing that this is possible. That there's no excuse. Yeah, okay, I would love to spend all my money, but where should I spend it? Yeah, I think there are some instruments, including the Blue Action Fund, that are doing a decent job in helping achieving 30 by 30. And obviously, how do we showcase that? That is through our projects. Ultimately, no one's interested in funding the Blue Action Fund. Ultimately, we all want to see a change on the ground and in the water. So I think there are some questions in how we are, if we cannot even better communicate successes on the ground. I think typical funders questions are obviously in terms of how to measure success, and how do we measure success in a way that this is helping also decision makers to allocate more funding to ocean conservation. I'm saying that my board is asking me sometimes this question. Okay, Markus, how much does it cost to conserve 1 square kilometer of the ocean? And I'm like, you guys, that's a difficult question, right? I mean, you are laughing. I mean, I understand where the question is coming from. I would maybe even ask the same, but it's really hard to answer. And I think we at least need to acknowledge that decision makers sometimes, I don't want to say they think differently, but they have a different metrics, they have different language that they use, and sometimes need different packages, different information, and there I think there's so on one hand, I think it's needed to pressure decision makers also to live up to their commitments, and at the same time, I think it's also for all of us as the ocean community, so to speak. It's up for us to possibly also get a little bit better in communicating successes and costs and progress and these kind of things.
Have you had encouraging conversations recently with maybe new governments that are considering kind of like joining the band and really kind of like taking advantage of these kinds of opportunities that Blue Action Fund has created?
Nothing to disclose at this stage, Rocky, but I think obviously we are reaching out to other government and other potential partners. I think also if you take a step back from the Blue Action Fund and you just look at ocean conservation as such, we have seen a tremendous increase in attention that is given to ocean conservation. I mean, look at the High Seas Treaty, look at deep sea mining, look at 30 by 30, actually, the big multilateral negotiation successes, they have all taken place in the ocean, actually, in the last years. And many countries are continuing to increase their commitment to ocean conservation and to rule-based, despite all political developments in some well-known countries. So I think there is some encouragement and also some optimism. I mean, what else? And but it remains challenging, and that is it's also clear. And in particular, public budgets, at least in Europe, they are squeezed due to the Russian war in Ukraine. Trade conflicts and other things are on people's radar. So obviously, we have to pay attention that ocean conservation is not regarded as a luxury, but as a really important issue.
I remember last year's Our Ocean, you were giving away stickers that said Ocean Optimism, right? And exactly. Yeah. And would you say that that's kind of like what you're trying to focus on and really kind of hold on to in the face of all of this?
It's I mean, am I always optimistic? Maybe no, but I think in my experience, if you want to maintain a certain level of energy to work on an issue, then I need the optimism for that. So yes, maybe the sticker is more for me and than for anyone else. No, but I think there are also examples, in particular, if you look at marine protected areas. I mean, if you there are plenty of examples where actually effective protection and equitable protection has worked. And that gives me plenty of hope. And often it has bounced back in very short amount of times. And I'm sure there are more people on this call who know this all much better because they are marine biologists or they have worked on this closer than I did. But I think there are these kind of encouragements. When I started working in 2006 on EU fisheries, the bluefin tuna was all over the media. Oh boy, you know, it's almost extinct, and it has rebounced. I mean, could it be better? Yes, of course. But is it in a complete different state compared to 18 years ago? Yes, and I think we have these examples in the ocean space, and we should actually communicate them more to also showcase, hey, it is possible. And that is also giving me lots of ocean optimism, actually. So if the right people come together, if there's the right energy, if the right ideas, if you bring the people along, if you bring the people behind the same objective, we can achieve unbelievable things. And obviously we here are very privileged to be in a position to help some of these organizations or communities or groups of people and organizations to do that work.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions before we open it up to Q&A. You mentioned equitable implementation, and maybe talk a little bit about how Blue Action Fund is thinking about equity around 30 by 30. What are you and the grantees doing to ensure equitable achievement of the 30 by 30 target?
Yeah. We have pushed for this since the very beginning in terms of stakeholder engagement, participation, but also in terms of funding actually going to the communities and going to those using the marine resources in a certain area. But I think at the very beginning, we did this more on a project by project basis and a little bit more like a feeling. And we have developed on that occasion, we have taken the initiative to develop standards in terms of processes, not necessarily exactly what you need to do, but at least what kind of process you have to go through.
Right.
And there we have increased our requirements to now request all our grantees to look into who has actually used the area so far, where are these users actually based, how vulnerable are they? So are they starving if they're not allowed to fish as much as they did in the past, or is it just a little bit less resources that they might have had at the end of the day? We are also looking further into quality checks on sustainable livelihood support measures that are undertaken by our grantees. In general, we look even more into our usually it's not one organization, it's our grantees, usually it's even coalitions. So we have environmental NGOs, but also social development NGOs. But all these kind of little tweaks here and there, and also the system, I think, has helped us a lot to strengthen our view how to ensure a more equitable management. And we will even go further down that road. I think there's also no way around it. So even looking into, it's always hard to describe it at a program level. So for instance, obviously, if, for instance, marine protected area is able to take some entry fees as an example, then obviously the communities should also benefit from that in one way or another. So is this possible for all protected areas? No. Maybe it's not possible in certain rural areas of Mozambique, but in some of the big protected areas where you have tourism, it is possible. But to have systems in place who require all of the stakeholders involved to discuss this, to think about it, and to pay attention, how can we actually ensure that benefits from this area are going back into the communities, that is where I see our responsibility. And in particular, of course, of the grantee, but our responsibility also to require it from the grantees.
Yeah, and I think that is the difference, right? You have a very methodical way of asking the hard questions. So really forcing people to think about the impact of displacement and effort controls, I think, is something that really forces everyone to think with an equity lens as they plan the interventions. So yeah, that makes sense. Okay, final question before Q&A is really, we're both going to be at the UN Oceans Conference next month. What are your main expectations coming out of there?
I would actually hope for a little bit more of funding and for some more political commitment. I mean, that's what international conferences are about.
Cool. Yeah.
And obviously, many of these processes have already started. So usually the meetings themselves are just the culmination and the moment of announcements and these kind of things. So my biggest hope would be that there are ways to maintain a little bit that momentum. We have 25, so 5 years left until 2030. The next UN Ocean Conference is going to be 28. So almost just 5 minutes before 12, so to speak.
Right.
Maybe 10 minutes, but reasonably late. So I think, to be honest, I'm sometimes making that calculation myself, assuming that governments now gave the Blue Action Fund I mean, how much funding are we able to invest till 2030?
Okay. Yeah. Do you have any specific events lined up for UN Ocean?
We have many events, partially also organized by our grantees. And what we have been traditionally doing is organize at least one event also to convene our grantees, again, to allow them to exchange among each other, but also to seek some feedback from them and to ensure that people at least have a face and feel encouraged to seek open communications also in between all these official meetings.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We're going to transition over to Q&A. I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of questions for you. And I'm going to invite Steph, who's in the background, to kind of share some of those questions.
All right, are we ready?
Yep.
Okay, the first question I have here is from someone who registered for us. Where can philanthropy currently have the most outsized impact on ocean conservation, mitigation, and resilience issues?
Tough question.
Big question. Yeah.
It's a really tough question, and I think many of the philanthropic sector ask these questions themselves all the time, and I'm sometimes wondering how much effort and energy should be invested into this question, where to find the most. Is it maybe not better if you know that certain things work just to go and fund it? So almost like an investor, like do you always seek for the highest return on investment, or do you look for a good return on investment, but you know that it works? And for the Blue Action Fund, the objective was enshrined in our charter before I came. So I don't have that. We have other discussions like in which country might marine protected areas work better. So we are, as I said, we have a relatively narrow focus on marine protected areas, but there are many new philanthropic funders entering the ocean space. Have entered in the last years, and many of them, of course, ask themselves exactly that question, and I find it extremely tough. And I personally, if I were one of them, I would most likely go rather for good investments rather than for the best investment.
Big one. Okay. That's scaling that a little bit, I guess. Yeah. Next one, Steph.
Yes. All right. Are there any innovative approaches or technologies Blue Action Fund is considering to maximize the impact of available limited resources to achieve 30 by 30?
Yeah, we operate through open calls for proposals. So so far, normally, I mean, everything is under discussion and we can also change a little bit, but by and large, we have really taken a back seat in having further requests or further suggestions what to focus on, i.e. we have asked the NGO community to come up with good proposals. We have looked at them in terms of contribution to MPAs and to the coastal communities, but we have not usually looked at them in terms of new technologies, for instance. So in some of these proposals, some NGOs, if they deem suitable, they have made quite a number of proposals, be it satellite monitoring or drones or eDNA. Fascinating subject to measure biodiversity over time. So these kind of things, but again, it's hard for us to, or I feel usually happy if we are not imposing this from Berlin. This is where we are all based, to say, hey, you all need to now use high technology, because there's always an offset to it. So if you use high technology, as we all know, then if something is not working, in particular in a context of the global south, where you don't always have spare parts or repair services or these kinds of things, they are more cost intensive. Usually you have a higher transaction cost between experts and the constituencies and the communities. So just to give you an example, in one project, one grantee proposed quite a large number of underwater videos, of BRAFs, of bait remote underwater videos to do monitoring on sharks in that case. No, it was fish. Anyway, it was for fish. And ultimately we agreed that they should rather count bird nests. And because the birds were feeding on the fish, so it was not sharks, obviously. And I just bring it up as an example because for us it seemed sufficient to get a feel if biomass of fish is at least stabilized, so to speak. And it was not important for us is to do fish counting, so to speak. And obviously, if you count bird nests and the bird population, you can involve local actors. It's much cheaper. It has plenty of advantages, despite the fact that it's as low budget as it can be and as low technology as it can be. So usually we leave it to our grantees, but in theory, we could also have a call for proposals, and if our funders would agree on that, to say, for instance, hey, let's go for monitoring and surveillance, for instance, and really try to drive new technologies into that. Obviously, I mean, we are definitely recognizing that we are working in a very, very, very dynamic area in terms of technology, in particular also in the marine space. And that many of the things, it's not just deep sea mining that is getting cheaper, it's also obviously monitoring devices and other things that have changed completely in the last 10 years.
And I imagine that in a couple more cycles, you'll really start to see some patterns of technologies that seem to be really gaining traction among your grantees, right? And then could potentially do something across the board to help enable uptake for more of the users. Would that be a potential avenue you could?
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Steph, next one.
All right, this is a two-part question. Feel free to respond to the first one and I can read the second one after if you need me to repeat it. But how do you see the role of nature finance instruments such as rare earth impact bonds in the necessary funding we seek? Is it highly promising or accelerating? And this is the second part. Along the lines of innovation, besides innovative finance instruments such as impact bonds, are you seeing much innovative business strategies on businesses thinking to support the projects funded?
Oh, tough question. Tough question. I mean, there's a lot of movement in financing instruments. And overall, I think it's something positive because as we all agree, there needs to be more money entering the space. And at the same time, I think one still has to look into it carefully. It's like anything new almost. And I think it's a very personal comment. I think it's not necessarily an official Blue Action Fund comment, but often I see very simplistic models where basically the question is first it's like we need new money, we need private money, a little bit public funding is out of fashion, you know, we need something very exciting, we need whatever bonds or other type of instruments. And then they come back to the public funders and still ask, but you need to give us a lot of funding in order to get all these exciting funding going. And there this is almost the level of detail that we receive some of these proposals, and that I find not necessarily sufficient convincing. So there I have a lot of questions. I have also a lot of questions when it comes to, for instance, step swaps. I mean, if you save funding, if you save so much funding to some extent, then you can also save funding for the next step swapped. You would not necessarily need to go fundraising one by one for another debt swap. You could say, hey, with the first two or with the first debt swap, we are almost integrating a mechanism that is triggering the next one. So I think there is a big question of what role philanthropy or public funders have to play in these financing instruments. And my feeling is that this is sometimes not sufficient clearly thought through, or not sufficient clearly and succinct also communicated where does the public funding part end and where does the private capital kicks in. And just this overarching narrative, you need to come in to reduce a little bit the risk, and then everything works automatically and magically. I'm still waiting for those instruments, to be very honest. If they were so successful, I think they would also have proliferated also already a little bit more. So I think it's really good that we have them. I think it's really good that there's focus given on them, that we also look into even more biodiversity credits or other things. But I think it's also really early on to have final judgments, and that the different roles of the different players are not yet always well defined.
Yeah, and
I don't know if I
definitely
answered
not
now the first or the second part of the
second.
question, or none of them, but I tried at least.
I think you went all the way to the second, is that correct, Steph? Yeah, definitely no silver bullets there. Steph, you have
I also want to say that because
sorry, go ahead.
the question started with nature conservation, and usually what I'm also I'm asking that sometimes also my own colleagues here, but in Germany, protected areas, and I think all over Europe, they all continue to receive public funding. So it's not something that is suddenly privatized and you know, and running by itself, so to speak. So, and I think this kind of as I said, it's a question of roles, and what I find is not helpful is to point fingers and say one is the better way, so to speak, necessary to get the funding, and one is less good. So usually you need mix of funding, and different funders have different roles, and it's important to get them organized, that they are working in the same direction.
Yeah. There's a comment in the chat thanking you for that very honest personal answer, because the person commenting has said that he's also been really stumped by the role of public and private investments in this. So thank you for that. Next question, Steph?
Yes. Okay. Can you imagine that a high seas MPA could fit into your portfolio in the future? Obviously, the social impact is more distant here, but nevertheless can very much improve local livelihoods through fisheries and other ecosystem benefits.
Simple answer, yes. In fact, we started working a little bit. I mean, acknowledging obviously that biodiversity patterns, migration patterns, don't stop at the end of the EZ, of the exclusive economic zone. We actually started to cooperate with some of our grantees to expand the area of their of their projects. And all our projects started in the EZ, but that's more of a legal reason, because the funding we receive is official development assistance. So all our funders, or so far, so far, if Sweden or Germany has given the Blue Action Fund funding, they report this towards the OECD as part of their funding under official development assistance. And this is something they can only do if it takes place in the EEZs of the so-called developing countries. And so we have to pay a little bit attention, and we decided that as long as the main part of that specific project is still in the EZ, that we could still start supporting actually the establishment of a high seas MPA. So we have a project that's at least where we are engaged, so to speak. As I said in the beginning, I'm sure we are not the only one, but we are trying to do our share to get early on with the implementation of the high seas. And if we received other types of funding from the foreign ministries or from cooperation with the private sector or others, definitely we could work on high seas MPAs. It's something that is very much discussed also in philanthropic circles. Obviously, I think I'm actually quite enthused to see how much work is going on behind the scenes, so to speak. While obviously we have sufficient signatories of the high seas agreement, but not yet sufficient ratifications. If we get there for UNOC in 4 weeks, I'm not entirely sure any longer, unfortunately. But I'm very optimistic that we get there over the course of the year. So and to be ready and to get everything in shape, I think there are quite a number of different funders, also some government funders, who are really doing quite a lot of efforts to get this going. And I'm very encouraged, at least, to see that from the distance, even if I'm not the expert to judge how fast this is going to happen or if it's sufficient.
And if you were to go into high seas MPAs, Markus, how would you think about the intersection with livelihoods and communities? Yeah.
I mean, again, it depends a little bit on the area, but first of all, I think that the high seas has almost even more a justice question compared to protected areas in the EEZs. I mean, these are areas that do not belong to anyone or to humankind, to everyone. So who is allowed to exploit these areas, be it for fishing, be it for mining, be it for genetic organisms or whatever? Obviously, we have a key benefit sharing question there. And I'm sometimes surprised that many of the discussions on high seas are actually more led by the environment ministries and not by the ministries for economic cooperation and development, because for me, this is the key question: who actually has the technology and the opportunities for the next couple of years at least to exploit those areas economically? And most likely the lower income countries, I would assume they would be all better off if you just close the high seas altogether from today to tomorrow, because usually they don't have the technology and the vessels and the equipment to go there and to start exploiting them. So I think there's a massive justice question. There's a massive question of justice and transfer of knowledge and of capacity, and also of potential profits to be gained in those areas. And yes, I see also responsibility for donors to emphasize this and to allow work on this and to show off options.
Thank you.
I think with the coastal communities, it's a little bit more complicated then, and it depends obviously then on the sites and on the EEZ and how close they are, and if they're. But for me, the first question is actually one level higher, I guess, really, in terms of international justice and who's exploiting those areas.
Yeah, Yes. Thanks. Next question, Steph.
Yeah, I think we have time for two more. So this one was actually already answered in the chat, but I think it's worth having a conversation about. So let me just share. How does the Blue Action Fund prioritize gender equity and social inclusion to promote equitable benefits sharing and effectively evaluate social impacts?
Now I'm saying something different than my colleague Pia in the chat. You try to test me. Oh, it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one. I think first of all that I think if you receive 20, 30, 40 proposals, you also get a feeling a little bit where organizations want to put an emphasis. And if an organization is not itself proactively trying to pursue something, it's very hard to twist their arm from the back and as a funder to impose certain activities from the distance. So definitely within the Blue Action Fund, all grantees who want to put even more emphasis on gender equity, on support to social dimensions, to support minorities, to support vulnerable people, they will find always very, very open ears. Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's as soon as we get some kind of indication, we would love to do even more. Most likely, you will have a very exciting exchange with my colleagues, how we can work together to actually do more. How is that then measured? I think it really depends again on the different situations. I mean, sometimes you have only women saving groups, for instance, or particular trainings for women, or you have leadership classes. Sometimes you have more outcome-based indicators, as I mentioned in the beginning, like what is the percentage of female in certain leadership positions, for instance. Yeah, but it's in the end, I mean, as always with these indicators, they are necessary. They are absolutely crucial to show progress and to ensure that funding continues to flow, but they are also not a direct copy of the reality, right? So there are other things that are also important that fall in between that are so hard to measure. Like empowerment of women, it's really hard to measure, right? And still you can, if you go there, you sometimes also know that a project has achieved something or not. So yes, we try to find this balance between having more paper-based indicators that are hopefully also relatively cost efficient to measure. And at the same, but still hopefully at least a bit meaningful. And then also to leave the space to a lot of things which are very hard to measure. And often I'm thinking of myself. I got a scholarship from the German government for some of my studies. On which basis did they do this? How do they want to measure if this is now paying back or not? This is a big black box that they invested in. And I'm not even judging if it was a good investment or not, but I'm just saying it. I mean, scholarships or these kind of, so how do you want to measure the exact success rate? I think it's important from funders also to leave space for some activities and also to continue to trust in certain impacts in between your formal indicators.
Great. I will send a copy of this webinar to your people who funded your scholarship and let them decide.
I thought to my board, and then they will get upset with me.
No, but I did wonder whether you've had some good success conveying some of these more intangible metrics to your board, and are you ever seeing a point where other than actually short of bringing them to the site, really being able to tell a slightly different story from just the tables and the metrics? Yeah.
As I said, I think it's you're almost getting into this communication question, right? Like how do you communicate success, and how do you bring it across? And some of it is, of course, it depends always on the people. So if you open a newspaper, some look at the photos, some look at maps, some just read the text, or others want numbers. So I think you need all of this a little bit. And similarly, obviously, we are very formal. As I said, we are publicly funded, so we have to showcase also progress in terms of numbers. Yeah, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's not sufficient. And then how to also create emotions, how to showcase some of these successes. I think there are different ways. You mentioned one, which is the old-fashioned bring people into one space and let them exchange. Sometimes you also have these more personalized, almost stories of certain people, how they achieve differences on the ground or smaller. I really like smaller success stories, because I think these are often where the real treasures are that give me actually a hope, and not necessarily 500,000 square kilometers, but that in between, and there are millions of them. And as I said in the beginning, I think that we all as a community could get much better in highlighting these successes, because they are there's a sheer endless number of these successes, and I'm really sure that they would change some dynamics also in terms of what is actually feasible and how important these investments are.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, we're coming up on time. Do you have any last words for our audience, Markus? You've been amazing. Yeah.
It's I only saw your face, Rocky, so I thank you and the Rare team for hosting me, and I do apologize for all the questions that I might not have answered, and for the invisible audience. And
No, yeah.
no, thank you. And as I said in the beginning, I mean, I think if you have any question about the Blue Action Fund, also don't be shy and follow up. We are keen to have open communications, and we are keen to make a meaningful change.
Thank you. You've really given us a lot of food for thought. You've provided very thoughtful answers, and I think good reasons for ocean optimism. So thank you, Markus.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll be sharing this recording for others as well. So good day to everyone, and thank you everyone.